Welcome, weary traveler. Come in from the cooling air and find your rest beside the fire. Tonight, we return once more to the Crossroads Inn, where an innkeeper keeps his diary by candlelight, recording the stories of all who pass through his doors. In this entry, the first true chill of autumn has arrived, and with it comes an elderly mapmaker carrying something precious. An atlas of roads both real and imagined, finished and forever incomplete. As the harvest wagons roll past and the oak tree's ribbons flutter in winds that smell of fallen leaves, the inn becomes a gathering place for those who have traveled far and those who wonder about the roads they never took. So settle in. Let the fire warm you. Let the innkeeper's words carry you gently into the night.
The seventh day of the month of fallen leaves. The first true autumn evening arrived today, not with the gradual cooling I had expected, but with a sudden decisiveness, as though the season had been waiting behind a door and finally chose to step through. I noticed it first in the quality of the light coming through the kitchen window as I kneaded bread this morning. The gold had deepened, taken on that particular slant that belongs only to autumn, casting longer shadows across the worn wooden work table where my father once taught me to shape loaves. By midday, the wind had shifted. It came now from the north, carrying with it the first real bite of the season and the faint, unmistakable scent of leaves beginning their long surrender. I stepped outside to check on the woodpile and found myself standing still for a long moment, simply breathing. The air tasted different, crisper, more honest somehow, as though summer's gentle lies had finally been set aside. The harvest wagons had been passing through the crossroads all week, heavy with the year's bounty. Pumpkins and gourds piled high, their orange and gold skins bright against the weathered wood of the cart beds, bushels of late apples, barley sacks that slump against each other like tired travelers. The drivers call out greetings as they pass, their voices carrying easily in the cooling air, and I wave back from the doorway of my inn, this sturdy building of timber and stone that my father raised with his own hands and the help of neighbors who understood what it meant to build a refuge at the place where two ancient roads meet. The common room feels different in autumn. I noticed it this evening as I lit the lanterns and coaxed the fire in the great stone hearth to full strength. The flames seem more necessary now, more welcome. The shadows they throw against the timber walls move with a kind of purpose they lack in summer, when the fire is merely pleasant rather than essential. The flagstone floor with its sand and dried rushes scattered between the stones holds the cold longer now, and I have begun laying out the thicker rugs that spend the warm months folded in the storage chest upstairs. It was into this newly autumn evening that the mapmaker arrived. I heard him before I saw him, which is unusual. Most travelers announce themselves with the sound of hooves on the hard-packed road or the creak of wagon wheels, or at least the steady rhythm of walking boots. But this traveler made a different sound entirely. A soft, irregular tapping like a woodpecker working a distant bark, accompanied by the shuffle of careful footsteps. When I opened the door, I found an old man standing at the threshold, leaning on a walking stick, whose base was wrapped in leather, worn smooth by years of use. He was not tall, though I suspect he once had been. Age had curved his spine into a gentle question mark, and his shoulders hunched forward as though protecting something precious against his chest. His hair, what remained of it, was the color of winter frost, and his beard, though neatly trimmed, held the same silver-white tone. But it was his eyes that caught me. Pale blue, the color of sky reflected in still water, and sharper than any blade I've ever seen. They moved constantly, taking in the door frame, the lantern light spilling out around me, the arrangement of stones in the path at his feet. Measuring, calculating, recording. "Good evening," I said, stepping aside to welcome him. "You have found the Crossroads Inn. Will you rest here tonight?" He looked at me then, those measuring eyes finally settling on my face, and something in his expression softened. "I have been looking for this place," he said, his voice surprisingly steady for his apparent age. "For rather a long time, as it happens." I did not ask what he meant by that. I have learned in my years of keeping this inn that some statements are invitations and others are simply observations offered to the air. This felt like the latter. He carried a satchel across his body. The leather strap cutting diagonally across his travel-worn coat. The satchel itself was remarkable. Old, certainly. The leather had been repaired many times, stitched with thread of different colors, where it had worn through or split. But it bulged with purpose, packed full of something he clearly valued above comfort, for he walked with a pronounced lean to compensate for its weight. I helped him to a seat near the fire, in the chair I think of as the storyteller's chair, though I have never called it that aloud. It sits at the perfect angle to catch the warmth without being overwhelmed by it, and its back is high enough to provide support for those whose bones have grown weary. He settled into it with a sigh that spoke of many miles, many years, and many evenings spent in chairs less comfortable than this one. "What can I bring you?" I asked. "I have stew warming, root vegetables with barley, and some smoked ham from the last of the summer's curing. There is bread fresh from the clay oven this afternoon, and cider if you prefer something warm, or ale if you do not." "Cider," he said, and then, after a moment's consideration, "and bread. I find I have less appetite than I once did, but bread and cider will serve nicely." I fetched both, bringing also a small pot of honey and a wedge of soft cheese, because sometimes what a traveler needs is not what they ask for. He accepted these additions with a small nod of gratitude and ate slowly, methodically, his eyes continuing their endless circuit of the room, even as his hands worked at the simple meal. 3 other guests occupied the common room that evening. A merchant woman heading south with a cartload of woven blankets, eager to reach the lowland markets before the true cold set in. A young man who had introduced himself only as a courier, though he carried no visible messages and spoke little of his destination. And an older couple, husband and wife, who had been traveling the eastern road for weeks, visiting a daughter who had married into a fishing family in one of the coastal towns. The mapmaker watched them all with those measuring eyes, and I found myself wondering what he saw. What calculations were running behind that pale blue gaze? what measurements he was making of this room, these people, this evening. It was the merchant woman who spoke first, drawn perhaps by the natural curiosity that serves a trade so well. "You carry quite a load there," she said, nodding toward the satchel he had set there carefully on the floor beside his chair. "Heavy work for a man traveling alone." He looked down at the satchel as though he had forgotten it was there, though I did not believe that for a moment. "Maps," he said simply. "I make maps." The word changed something in the room. I cannot explain exactly how, only that the quality of attention shifted. The courier looked up from his ale. The older couple, who had been speaking quietly to each other, fell silent. Even the fire seemed to crackle with renewed interest. "A mapmaker," the merchant woman said, and there was something in her voice. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "We do not see many of those on the roads anymore." "No, dear," he agreed. "We are a dying art, I suppose. The great surveys have been completed. The kingdoms have their official charts. What need is there for a man who walks the roads with ink and parchment? And yet walk them still," I observed. He turned those measuring eyes on me, and for a moment I felt as though I were being recorded, as though my height and bearing and the exact position of the lantern light on my face were being committed to some internal ledger. "I walk them still," he agreed, "because the official charts are not finished. They cannot be finished. Roads change. Villages appear and disappear. Rivers shift their courses. A map is never complete. It is only ever a record of what was true at the moment of its making." He paused, reaching down to touch the bulging satchel with something like affection. "And some roads," he added, his voice dropping lower. "Exit only in the spaces between the ones that have been charted." The 8th day of the month of falling leaves, morning, arrived with frost on the windows, delicate patterns of ice that caught the early light and scattered it in tiny rainbows across the flagstone floor. I woke earlier than usual, drawn from sleep by a quality of silence that belongs only to cold mornings, when the world seems to hold its breath in anticipation of the sun's warmth. The mapmaker was already awake when I came downstairs. I found him sitting at one of the larger tables near the window, the contents of his satchel spread before him in careful arrangement. He looked up at my approach, but did not speak, merely nodded and returned his attention to the work before him. And what work it was! Maps covered the table in overlapping layers, like fallen leaves that had accumulated in a sheltered corner. Some were small, no larger than my hand, sketched on scraps of parchment that had clearly been salvaged from other uses. Others were larger, proper sheets of drafting paper covered in intricate detail. One I noticed was drawn on leather, soft and supple, the ink soaked deep into the hide in a way that would outlast paper by generations. I stood at a respectful distance, not wanting to intrude, but unable to look away. The maps were beautiful, each one rendered with a precision that spoke of decades of practice, but also with a warmth that official charts never possess. Here was a mountain pass with tiny trees sketched along its edges, each one distinct, each one clearly drawn from observation rather than convention. There was a river valley with the current's direction indicated by subtle shading, the water seeming almost to flow across the page. "You may look more closely," the mapmaker said without raising his head. They are meant to be seen." I approached slowly, pulling out a chair across from him and settling into it with the kind of care one uses around precious things. Up close, the maps revealed even more detail, notations in a cramped but legible hand, distances marked in various units, small symbols I did not recognize at first until I realized they indicated inns, wells, and other places where travelers might find rest or sustenance. "These are remarkable," I said, and meant it. "How many have you made?" He considered the question, his fingers tracing the edge of the leather map absently. "Thousands, I suppose. Over the years, most are gone now, sold or given, or simply worn to illegibility. What remains is what I could not bear to part with, and what is not yet finished." "Not yet finished?" He reached into the prelab and withdrew a map that was different from the others, larger, more elaborate. But also, I realized as I looked at it more closely, incomplete. Sections of the parchment remained blank. Empty spaces where roads should have been but were not, where villages should have been marked but had been left as nothing more than faint pencil outlines awaiting the ink that would make them real. "My life's work," he said, a note of something complicated in his voice. Pride, certainly, but also weariness, and perhaps a touch of something like grief. "An atlas of the roads between the paths that connect the places the official surveys have missed. The villages too small to warrant a name on the kingdom's charts. The crossroads where travelers must make choices that will shape the rest of their journeys." He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the full weight of his years in those pale blue eyes. "I have been working on this atlas for 43 years, he said, "and I'm beginning to understand that I will never finish it." Before I could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of another guest. The young courier descended with the careful tread of someone accustomed to early mornings, her boots already laced and her traveling cloak draped over one arm. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, her gaze drawn immediately to the spread of maps across the table. "Those are maps," she said, stating the obvious in the way people do when they are caught off guard by unexpected beauty. The mapmaker smiled, the first true smile I'd seen from him. "They are. Would you like to see them?" She approached with a hesitation that surprised me. Couriers, in my experience, are practical people, focused on their routes and their messages and the fastest path between 2 points. They do not generally pause to admire craftsmanship. But this courier was different. She moved toward the table as though drawn by invisible thread, her eyes moving across the scattered maps with an intensity that matched the mapmaker's own. "This one," she said suddenly, her hand reaching out to touch the corner of a medium-sized map depicting what appeared to be a mountain road. "I know this road." The mapmaker leaned forward with obvious interest. "Do you?" The northern pass, the one through the Shepherd's Gap." Her finger traced a line on the map following a route marked in red ink that diverged from the main road and wound through what appeared to be a narrow valley. "I took this path last winter. The main road was blocked by snow, and I had messages that could not wait. An old shepherd told me about this alternate route. He said his grandfather had used it, and his grandfather before him." She looked up at the mapmaker with something like wonder in her eyes. "I thought I was the only one who knew it existed. The official surveys do not show it. I have looked." "The official survey," the mapmaker said, and there was gentle amusement in his voice, "are concerned with the roads that armies march on and tax collectors travel. They have little interest in the paths that shepherds use, or the routes that only make sense when the snow has closed all other options." "But you knew," the courier said. "You marked it here." "I walked it myself 30 years ago in similar circumstances as it happens. The snow does not care for official surveys, and neither do the mountains." He reached out and touched the map with obvious affection. "This road saved my life, as I suspect it saved yours. Such roads deserve to be remembered." The courier was silent for a long moment, her fingers still resting on the map, as though reluctant to break the connection. "I have other routes," she said finally, "paths I have found over the years, shortcuts and alternates, and roads that appear on no chart I've ever seen. Would you like to know them?" The mapmaker's smile widened, and in that moment I saw the boy he must once have been, eager and curious and hungry for the world's secrets. "I would like nothing more," he said. "Please sit. Tell me everything." I left them to their conversation, moving into the kitchen to begin the day's bread and to set water boiling for those who would want tea or warm washing water. But through the kitchen doorway, I could see them still, heads bent together over the maps, the courier's finger tracing routes, while the mapmaker made notes in a small leather journal he had produced from somewhere within his coat. The common room slowly filled as the morning progressed. The merchant woman came downstairs with tales of strange dreams and a request for extra honey in her tea. The older couple emerged hand in hand, their affection for each other evident in every small gesture, every shared glance, and new arrivals joined them. A tinker with a cart full of repaired kettles and sharpened knives, seeking breakfast before continuing on his rounds. A family heading east to visit relatives before the roads became too difficult for young children. But it was the tinker who caused the mapmaker to stop writing mid-sentence. "I know you," the tinker said, pausing in the doorway to the common room, his eyes fixed on the old man at the table. I know that face. The mapmaker looked up, and something passed between them. Recognition, but also time. The vast and unforgiving distance of years. Harlan, the mapmaker said, and the name came out like a prayer or a memory. Harlan Fletcher. You used to travel the western routes. I did. The tinker, Harlan, stepped fully into the room. He was perhaps 60, with the weathered hands of someone who had spent a lifetime working with metal and leather and the small, broken things that people could not bear to throw away. And you used to stop at my family's farm near the edge of the frontier. You mapped the old stone roads, the ones that ran through the forest where no one travels anymore. I remember. The mapmaker's voice had grown soft, distant. Your mother fed me rabbit stew and would not accept payment. Your father showed me the boundary markers his grandfather had found, carved with symbols no one could read. They are both gone now, Harlan said. The farm, too. A fire 10 years past. But I remember you. I remember watching you work, the way you measured everything with your eyes before you ever set ink to paper. I remember thinking that you saw things no one else could see. Perhaps I did, the mapmaker said. Perhaps I still do. Would you like to see what remains of those old roads? I have kept the maps all these years. The tinker set down his pack and crossed to the table with a purpose that belied his apparent age. And as the mapmaker shuffled through his collection, searching for one particular document among the thousands, I watched the room transform. What had been a collection of strangers sharing temporary shelter became something else. A gathering, a community forming around scraps of parchment and memories of roads that no longer existed, or perhaps had never existed at all, except in the minds of those who remembered walking them. The afternoon light had softened to gold by the time the mapmaker finished showing Harlan the old frontier roads. They sat together in comfortable silence, two men connected across decades by shared memories of places that no longer existed. I brought them fresh tea and a plate of honeyed oat cakes I had baked that morning, the kind my father used to make when travelers lingered longer than expected. The mapmaker accepted both with a grateful nod, his hands wrapping around the warm mug as though drawing strength from its heat. Tell me, Harlan said, breaking the silence, have you ever found a road that you wished you had not? The mapmaker considered the question for a long moment, his pale blue eyes distant, seeing something none of us could see. Once, he said finally, many years ago, there was a path through the eastern marshes that I followed on rumor alone. The fishermen in the coastal villages spoke of it in whispers. They said it led to a place where the boundary between sea and land dissolved entirely, where the waves walked on solid ground and the earth flowed like water. Did you find it? I asked, drawn into the story despite myself. I found something, the mapmaker said. Whether it was what the fishermen described, I cannot say. The marsh played tricks on my senses. The fog was so thick, I could not see my own feet. The sounds were wrong, echoes coming from directions that made no sense. And there were lights. Will-o-wisps, perhaps, or something else entirely. They danced at the edge of my vision, always retreating when I turned toward them, always leading me deeper into the mire. He paused, taking a sip of his tea. The common room had grown very quiet. Even the fire seemed to crackle more softly, as though listening. I walked for what felt like hours, he continued. Perhaps it was only minutes. Time behaves strangely in places like that. And then I came to a clearing, if you can call it that, a space where the fog parted just enough for me to see the ground beneath my feet. "What did you see?" the mother asked. She had drawn closer during the story, her daughter pressed against her side. "Footprints," the mapmaker said. "Dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, pressed into the soft earth preserved by the peculiar nature of that place. They came from every direction, converging on that single point, and then simply stopped. No footprints leading away, only arrivals, never departures." "Whose footprints?" the girl whispered. The mapmaker shook his head slowly. "I do not know. I never found out. I turned back immediately, retracing my steps through the fog, following my own trail until I reached solid ground again. I have never returned to that marsh. I have never marked that road on any map." "Why not?" Harlan asked. "You have mapped everything else. The forgotten roads, the abandoned paths, the crossroads where the world grows thin. Because some roads are not meant to be walked," the mapmaker said simply. "Some destinations are not meant to be reached. I map roads to help travelers find their way. That road, the road to that clearing, would help no one. It would only lead them to the same questions I found there, the same mysteries, the same footprints that arrive but never leave." The fire crackled, louder now, as though released from some spell of silence. The white candle on the mantel flickered just once, its flame bending toward the window as though drawn by something outside. I looked, but there was nothing there, only the ancient oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the autumn wind, its prayer ribbons dancing like colorful promises against the darkening sky. "There are other roads like that," the mapmaker continued, his voice softer now, almost confessional. "Roads I have found but never mapped. Roads that lead to places too strange, too unsettling, too outside the boundaries of what most travelers can accept. I carry them in my memory, these unmarked paths. They are the weight I bear, the knowledge I cannot share." "It sounds lonely," the merchant woman said. She had set aside her mending and was watching the mapmaker with an expression I could not quite read. "It is," the mapmaker admitted. "But loneliness, I have found, is the price of seeing things that others cannot see, of walking roads that others will not walk, of mapping a world that is larger and stranger and more wonderful than most people dare to imagine." He looked around the room at the faces gathered there, at the maps spread across the table, at the white candle burning steady on the mantel. "But moments like this," he said, and his voice held a warmth that had not been there before. moments when strangers gather to share their roads, when the maps on the table become bridges between separate lives, when loneliness transforms into something shared, something communal, something almost like family. These moments make the rest of it worthwhile. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Harlan reached out and placed his weathered hand over the Mapmakers. "To the roads we have walked," he said, "and the roads still waiting to be found." "To the roads," the Mapmaker agreed, and one by one, around the common room, voices joined in the quiet toast. The merchant woman, the older couple, the mother and daughter, the courier who had returned from checking on her horse and slipped back into the room so quietly I had not noticed. Even myself, raising my mug of cooling tea to honor the sentiment. To the roads. Outside, the wind picked up, sending the oak tree's ribbons into a frenzied dance. But inside the inn, surrounded by maps and memories and the warmth of shared stories, there was only peace. The afternoon brought a chill that crept beneath the door and around the window frames, a reminder that the season was truly turning. I built the fire higher and set more cider to warm, watching as steam rose from the iron pot like gentle spirits ascending toward the smoke-darkened rafters above. The Mapmaker and the tinker had spent the morning lost in conversation, their voices rising and falling in the comfortable rhythm of shared memory. The maps spread between them told a story I could only partially follow, a narrative of roads that had once connected settlements now abandoned, paths that had served families and traders and wandering seekers for generations before being slowly forgotten. "This one," the tinker said, as tapping a faded section of the leather map. "This road vanished when I was still a boy. There was a bridge over the creek, wooden old even then. When it collapsed, no one rebuilt it. People found other ways, and now the forest has reclaimed everything. You could walk within 10 paces of where the road used to run and never know it was there." "But it was there," the Mapmaker said. "For 100 years, perhaps more. People traveled it. They carried their hopes and fears along its length. They stopped at your family's farm, rested their horses, ate your mother's rabbit stew. The road may be gone, but the shape of it remains. In the land, in memory, in maps like this one." The tinker was quiet for a long moment, his work-roughened fingers tracing the ghost road on the parchment. "I never thought of it that way," he admitted. "I thought when things were gone, they were simply gone. Nothing is simply gone," the Mapmaker said. "Not truly. It transforms. It becomes something else. A road becomes a memory, becomes a story, becomes a mark on a map that someone will look at generations from now and wonder. They will wonder who walked there and why, and what they found at the journey's end. Outside the windows, the ancient oak tree stood sentinel at the crossroads, its leaves beginning their transformation from green to gold to amber. The prayer ribbons tied to its lower branches fluttered in the autumn wind, their faded colors catching the slanted afternoon light. Some of those ribbons had been there since before I took over the inn from my father. Others were new, left by travelers who stopped to offer their hopes to whatever spirits might be listening at this place where roads and worlds intersected. I found myself wondering as I watched the ribbons dance, how many of them had been tied by people whose journeys the Mapmaker had recorded. How many of those whispered prayers had been carried along roads that appeared in his atlas, their paths preserved in ink long after the travelers themselves had moved on. The door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and two new arrivals. A woman, perhaps 40, with the careful posture of someone accustomed to long walks and heavier burdens, and a girl, younger, perhaps 15 or 16, who looked around the common room with eyes that held equal measures of wonder and wariness. Mother and daughter, I guessed immediately, and the guess was confirmed when the woman's hand found the girl's shoulder in a gesture of protective guidance. "Welcome," I said, rising from my chair near the fire. "You have found the Crossroads Inn. Will you be staying the night?" The woman's eyes flickered to the map still spread across the large table, to the Mapmaker and the tinker bent together in conversation, to the other guests scattered about the room. Something in her expression shifted, softened, as though she had been holding her breath and finally found permission to release it. "Yes," she said, "we will stay. We have been traveling for some days, and my daughter is weary." I showed them to a table near the fire, but not too close, where they could warm themselves without feeling crowded by the other guests. As I brought bowls of stew and fresh bread, I noticed the girl's attention drifting repeatedly toward the Mapmaker's table, her gaze caught by the scattered parchments like a moth drawn to candlelight. The Mapmaker noticed too. He looked up from his conversation with the tinker, and those measuring eyes there found the girl's face. Something passed between them, some recognition I did not understand, and then the Mapmaker spoke. "Would you like to see the maps?" The girl looked to her mother, who hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Go," she said. "I will be here when you return." The girl approached the table with the cautious steps of someone who has learned that beautiful things can be dangerous, that offers of wonder sometimes come with hidden costs. But as she drew closer, as she began to see the detail in the Mapmaker's work, I watched her caution give way to something else, something like hunger. "These are not like any maps I have seen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," the Mapmaker agreed, "they are not. The maps you have seen were made to show people where to go. These maps were made to remember where people have been. There is a difference." The girl leaned closer, her eyes moving across the nearest map with an intensity that reminded me of the courier this morning. "What is this one? This symbol? Here." The Mapmaker followed her pointing finger to a small mark I had not noticed before, a circular shape with lines radiate outward like the spokes of a wheel, or perhaps like roads extending from a central point. "That," he said, and his voice held a quality I had not heard from him before. Reverence, perhaps, or wonder. That is a crossroads, a true crossroads, where the boundary between worlds grow thin and travelers must choose their direction carefully. There are not many of them left. They are easy to miss if you do not know what to look for. But they are important, perhaps the most important places on any map. The girl was silent for a long moment, her fingers still hovering above the symbol. Then she reached into the traveling bag at her hip and withdrew something small, something that caught the light and scattered it in familiar patterns. A compass, old, battered, its case worn smooth by years of handling. "My grandfather gave this to me," she said, "before he died. He told me it would always point me toward the road I needed to find, but I have never understood what he meant. The needle does not point north. It points wherever it wants to point, and sometimes it does not point at all." The mapmaker took the compass gently, cradling it in his palms as though it were something precious and fragile. He studied it for a long moment, turning it this way and that, watching the needle's uncertain movements. "Where did your grandfather travel?" he asked. "Everywhere," the girl said, and there was a catch in her voice that spoke of grief still fresh. "He was a wanderer. He left when he was young and did not return until he was very old. My mother says he walked every road in the known world, some that were unknown too." "I believe her, ear," the mapmaker said quietly. "This compass was made to find crossroads, places like this one." He looked up at the girl, and for a moment those pale blue eyes were not measuring but remembering. "I made one like it once, many years ago. I gave it to a young man who wanted to find all the thin places in the world, all the boundaries and borders and thresholds where one thing becomes another." The girl's breath caught. "You knew my grandfather?" "I may have. What was his name?" Evander Marsh." The mapmaker closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with emotion he made no effort to hide. "I knew him. We traveled together for a season when I was young and still believed I could map the entire world. He was the one who taught me that some roads cannot be found by looking. They can only be found by listening." The girl sank into the chair beside the mapmaker, her legs apparently unable to support her any longer. "He never told us. He never spoke of anyone he met on his travels. It was as though that part of his life belonged to someone else, someone we never knew." "Perhaps it did," the mapmaker said gently. "The road changes us. The person your grandfather was when he wandered is not the person he was when he returned. Both are real, both are true, but they are not the same." He handed the compass back to the girl, closing her fingers around it with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "Keep it. It will still guide you toward the roads you need to find, even if you do not understand how. Some things work whether we understand them or not." The girl's mother had risen from her seat and approached the table during this exchange. She stood now at her daughter's shoulder, one hand resting protectively on the girl's back, her expression unreadable. "My father never spoke of you," she said to the mapmaker. "But then he never spoke of much. The years he spent wandering were a closed door, room we were not permitted to enter." "Some journeys are like that," the mapmaker said. "Not because they are shameful, but because they are sacred. Because putting them into words would diminish them, turn them into stories that could be questioned and doubted and eventually forgotten. Your father kept his travels secret because they were too precious to share, not because he did not trust you, because he could not bear to see them become ordinary." The mother was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she pulled out a chair and sat down beside her daughter. "Show me these maps," she said. "Show me the roads my father walked. Show me the crossroads where the world grows thin." And the mapmaker did. The evening settled over the inn like a blanket drawn up by gentle hands. The fire burned low and warm, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the common room, across the timber beams that my father had hewn from trees he felled himself, across the faces of the travelers gathered around the mapmaker's table. They had all gravitated there eventually. The merchant woman, her blankets forgotten. The courier, who had returned from some errand I had not noticed her leaving on, her face flushed from the cold and her eyes bright with purpose. The older couple, holding hands still, their fingers interlaced like the threads of a tapestry. The tinker, who had not stopped talking for hours, sharing memories and stories, and the names of places that existed now only in the minds of those who remembered them. And the mother and daughter, sitting close together, their shoulders touching, the compass held between them like a talisman or a prayer. I moved among them, refilling mugs and clearing plates, adding wood to the fire and lighting additional candles as the darkness outside deepened. The white candle on the mantel burned as it always burned, steady and unwavering, its pale flame seeming somehow brighter tonight than usual. I found myself watching it more than once, wondering if I imagined the way it seemed to lean toward the maps spread across the table, as though drawn by some force I could not perceive. "The crossroads teaches patience," the mapmaker said, his voice carrying easily through the quiet room. He was addressing no one in particular, or perhaps everyone at once. "It asks nothing except that we rest. But while we rest, it shows us things, possibilities, paths we had not considered, roads that exist only in the spaces between the ones we know." He picked up one of the larger maps, the incomplete atlas he had shown me that morning. "This is what I've been trying to capture all these years. Not just the roads that exist, but the roads that should exist, the connections that make sense, even if no one has walked them yet, the paths that would serve travelers better than the paths they are forced to take." "How do you know?" The courier asked. "How do you know what roads should exist if you have not walked them?" "By listening," the mapmaker said, "by paying attention, by noticing the patterns in how people move, in what they need, in where they are trying to go and what obstacles stand in their way. He tapped the map with one gnarled finger. A road is not just a line on a map. It is an answer to a question. When someone tells me they wish there was a faster route to the coast, or a safer path through the mountains, or a way to reach a place that seems unreachable, they are asking a question. And sometimes, if I listen carefully enough, I can find the answer. "But you said your atlas is unfinished," the merchant woman observed. "You said you will never complete it." "No," the mapmaker agreed, "I will not. Because the questions never stop. Because the world keeps changing, and people keep needing new roads, and some roads become unnecessary, while others become essential. A complete atlas would be a lie. It would suggest that the world is fixed, finished, settled. And the world is none of those things. The world is always becoming. He looked around the room, those pale blue eyes moving from face to face, measuring not in the way I'd seen before, but with something softer, something like gratitude. "This is why I travel still," he said. "Not because I believe I will ever finish my work, but because the work itself is valuable. Each road I record, each crossroads I mark, each connection I discover, they all matter, even if they will one day be forgotten. They matter because they help someone, they guide someone, they save someone, perhaps as that mountain pass saved the young courier here, and as it once saved me." The fire crackled, a log shifting and sending sparks swirling upward toward the chimney. The white candle's flame flickered just once, and then steadied again. "I will add this crossroads to my atlas," the mapmaker said quietly. "This inn, this place where the roads meet and travelers pause to choose their direction. It belongs in the collection. It has belonged there, I realize now, since I first heard of it many years ago." "You have heard of this inn?" I asked, surprised. "My father built it. My father raised its walls with his own hands. It is not famous, not marked on any official chart that I know of." "I have heard of many things," the mapmaker said, and there was a knowing quality to his smile. "Roads whisper to those who listen. And this crossroads, this particular intersection of paths, has been whispering for a very long time." The girl, the wanderer's granddaughter, looked down at the compass in her hands. The needle was moving, I noticed, turning slowly, as though searching for something, as though listening. "What is it searching for?" she asked. "The next crossroads," the mapmaker said. "The next thin place, the next boundary between what is and what might be. Your grandfather spent his life finding such places. The compass carries that purpose still, even though he is gone. It will guide you if you let it, but only if you are willing to follow where it points, even when the direction makes no sense." The girl looked at her mother. The mother looked at her daughter. Something passed between them, silent and profound. We were going west, the mother said finally, to start a new life, my daughter and I, to find a place where we could begin again. And now? The mapmaker asked. The mother smiled, and it was a smile that held both sadness and hope, gladly grief and anticipation. Now I think we will follow the compass for a while, see where it leads. My father spent his life wandering, and I always thought he was running away from something, but perhaps he was running towards something instead. Perhaps there are answers out there on those roads you speak of, roads that exist in the spaces between. The mapmaker nodded slowly, as though this was the answer he had expected, the answer he had been waiting for. The road will provide, he said. It always does, not easily, not comfortably, but sufficiently. You will find what you need if you're willing to keep moving, if you are willing to let the journey change you. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and sending a draft whisking through the common room that made the candle flames dance. But the white candle on the mantel burned steady, its pale light unwavering. I looked at it, and I could have sworn for just a moment that it burned a little brighter. The 9th day of the month of falling leaves, rain arrived in the night. Not the gentle spring rain that coaxes flowers from the soil, but the steady autumn rain that settles in like a guest who has decided to stay. I woke to the sound of it drumming on the wooden shingles above my head, a rhythm both relentless and oddly comforting. The world beyond my small window was gray and soft, the familiar shapes of the stable and woodshed reduced to smudged outlines through the water-streaked glass. I dressed quickly and descended to find the common room already occupied. The rain had trapped everyone inside, it seemed. The merchant woman sat near the fire, mending a tear in one of her blankets with small, precise stitches. The tinker had set up a portable workbench and was cleaning rust from a set of old hinges someone had brought him, his movements practiced and patient. The older couple shared a pot of tea at a corner table. Their conversation carried on in the comfortable murmurs of people who have spent decades learning each other's silences. The mother and daughter were still asleep, their room above the common room quiet. But the mapmaker was awake, and once again his materials were spread across the large table, though today they were arranged differently, more deliberately, as though he was preparing for something. "Good morning," I said, moving toward the kitchen to begin the day's work. Did you sleep well?" "I did," he said, not looking up from his arrangement. "The rain helped. I always sleep better when I can hear the world washing itself clean." I smiled at that and continued to the kitchen, where I set water to boil and pulled out the ingredients for porridge: oats, honey, dried apples, a pinch of cinnamon. Simple fare for a rain-bound day when warmth and comfort matter more than variety. When I returned to the common room with the first bowls of porridge, I found that the mapmaker had been joined by the courier, who was studying the papers on the table with an intensity that bordered on reverence. "This is not possible," she was saying, her voice low but urgent. "This road, here, it does not exist." The mapmaker looked up at her with those measuring eyes, and there was something like amusement in his expression. "It does not exist yet," he corrected gently. But it should. Look at the terrain. Look at the way the valleys align, the placement of the water sources, the natural passes through the hills. A road here would cut 3 days off the journey from the coastal towns to the mountain settlements. 3 days in weather like this could mean the difference between life and death for a courier carrying urgent messages. The courier leaned closer, her finger tracing the proposed route. "You're right," she said, wonder creeping into her voice. "I have made that journey dozens of times. I have always wished there was a faster way. And here it is. A road that should exist, you said. A road that answers a question no one thought to ask." "Someone asked it," the mapmaker said. "You asked it. Every time you made that journey, every time you wished for a shorter path, you were asking. The road exists in those wishes. It exists in the need. All that remains is for someone to walk it into reality." "Could you?" the courier asked. "Could you make this road real?" The mapmaker shook his head slowly, a gesture heavy with regret. "Once, perhaps, when I was younger, when my legs were strong and my eyes were sharp and I could walk for weeks without rest, but now?" He looked down at his gnarled hands, at the walking stick propped against the table beside him. "Now I can only record. I can map the roads that should exist. I can show others where to look. But the walking, the making, that belongs to younger feet than mine." The courier was silent for a long moment, her gaze moving between the map and the old man who had made it. "Then perhaps," she said finally, "I will walk it. Not now, not today, but when the weather clears, when my current messages are delivered. I will come back, and I will walk this road that should exist, and I will make it real." The mapmaker smiled, and it was a smile that held generations within it. "That would be a fine thing," he said. "A fine thing indeed." The morning passed slowly, as rain-bound mornings do. More guests ventured downstairs as the smell of porridge and fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards. The mother and daughter emerged together, the girl still carrying her grandfather's compass, though the needle had stilled sometime in the night, and now pointed steadily toward the mapmaker's table. "I noticed this." I said nothing. Some observations are meant to be kept. The mapmaker had produced key additional materials from his seemingly bottomless satchel. Not just maps now, but the tools of his trade, a portable inkwell, set of pens with nibs of varying thickness, a magnifying glass that caught the gray light from the windows and bent it into rainbows across the table's surface, and paper, blank paper, waiting. "I would like," he announced to the room at large, "to add to my atlas today. I have walked many roads in my life, but I have not walked them all. Each of you has traveled paths I have never seen, visited places I have never been. You carry maps in your memories, roads written on your hearts. If you would be willing, I would like to record some of them." The room fell quiet. The rain continued its steady rhythm on the roof, but inside, everything seemed to hold its breath. "What would we need to do?" the merchant woman asked finally. "Simply talk," the mapmaker said. Tell me about the roads you have traveled, the places you have stopped, the landmarks that guided you, the dangers that threatened you, the beauties that made the journey worthwhile. I will listen, I will ask questions, and I will draw what you describe. The merchant woman set down her mending and looked at the mapmaker with an expression I could not quite read. I have traveled the lowland routes for 20 years, she said. I know every town between here and the southern marshes, every inn, every well, every place where a wagon can safely stop for the night. Then yours is the knowledge I need, the mapmaker said. Please begin wherever you wish. And so it started. The merchant woman spoke first, describing the road she knew best, the way the land rose and fell in gentle waves as you traveled south, how the soil changed from rocky to loamy, how the bridges over the marsh streams were built differently than bridges elsewhere, designed to float rather than resist when the waters rose. She spoke of the inns where she had found welcome and the inns where she had been turned away, of the seasons that made some roads passable and others treacherous, of the shortcuts known only to those who had traveled the same routes for decades. The mapmaker listened, his pen moving across the paper in swift, confident strokes. He asked questions, not the questions I would have expected, not about distances or landmarks, but about feelings. How did it feel to cross the first marsh bridge? What was the quality of light in the lowland towns at sunset? Were there sounds that you associated with particular stretches of road? Smells that told you where you were even with your eyes closed? The merchant woman answered everything. Her voice gained strength as she spoke, as though memories she had not known she carried were being drawn out of her like water from a deep well, and the map that took shape under the mapmaker's hands was unlike any map I had ever seen. It was not just lines and symbols, it was alive. The roads seemed to breathe on the page. The towns appeared as small clusters of warmth in a vast and rolling landscape. The marsh bridges floated above water, rendered in subtle shades of blue and gray. This is beautiful, the merchant woman whispered, leaning over to see what the mapmaker had created. This is exactly how it feels. How did you know? You told me, the mapmaker said. I only listened. The rain continued through the afternoon, and so did the map making. The tinker spoke next, describing the network of small villages and isolated homesteads where he plied his trade. Places too small to appear on any official chart. Places where people lived their entire lives without ever seeing a map that included their homes. The map maker recorded them all, each tiny settlement rendered with the same care and attention he had given to the merchant woman's lowland towns. The older couple shared their memories of the eastern road, the route they had traveled so many times to visit their daughter in her fishing village by the sea. They spoke of the way the landscape changed as you approached the coast, how the trees grew shorter and more twisted, bent by salt winds that blew constantly off the water. They described the smell of the sea, the cry of gulls, the particular quality of light that existed nowhere else. The courier added roads to the mountain regions, not the official passes which were already well documented, but the hidden paths, the alternate routes, the ways that existed only in the knowledge of those who had walked them in desperation or discovery. And the girl, the wanderer's granddaughter, spoke last. She did not describe roads she had traveled. Instead, she described roads she had dreamed. "My grandfather used to tell me stories," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Before he died, stories about places he had visited, roads he had walked. But some of them were different. Some of them did not sound like real places. They sounded like dreams, like wishes, like roads that led to somewhere impossible." The mapmaker's pen stilled on the paper. "Tell me," he said. And she did. She spoke of a road that led to a place where all lost things could be found. Not a physical place, but a state of being, a destination that existed only for those who had lost something precious and were willing to walk any distance to recover it. She spoke of a path through a forest where the trees remembered everything that had happened beneath their branches, where you could hear whispers of the past if you walked slowly enough and listened carefully enough. She spoke of a crossroads where time flowed differently in each direction, where you could choose not just where to go, but when to go there. The mapmaker listened to all of it. He did not laugh or dismiss or suggest that such places could not exist. He listened, and occasionally he nodded, and once or twice he closed his eyes as though seeing something that existed only in his memory. When the girl finished, he began to draw. The map that took shape was different from all the others. It was drawn in lighter lines, as though the roads were made of mist rather than stone. The landmarks were suggested rather than defined. The distances were marked not in miles, but in emotions, the length of grief, the breadth of hope, the depth of longing. "These roads," the mapmaker said as he worked, "are the roads that exist in the spaces between. They are not less real than the roads made of dirt and stone. They are differently real. Your grandfather knew them. He walked them, I suspect, more than he walked any other kind. And now they live in you, in the stories he told, in the dreams you carry." The girl watched the map take shape with tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Her mother sat beside her, one arm wrapped around the girl's shoulders, her own eyes bright with emotion. "Can anyone walk these roads?" the girl asked. "Anyone who knows they exist," the mapmaker said. "Anyone who believes they are real. The walking is the easy part. The believing is what most people cannot manage." He finished the map and slid it across the table toward the girl. "This is yours," he said. "I have many maps. I do not need this one, but I think you do. I think it will help you understand the roads your grandfather walked, and perhaps in time it will help you walk them yourself." The girl took the map with trembling hands. She held it as though it were made of glass, as though it might shatter if she gripped too tightly or breathed too hard. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing." The mapmaker smiled. I have spent my entire life believing in roads that other people cannot see, he said. It would be strange to stop now. The afternoon deepened toward evening, the gray light outside the windows darkening by slow degrees. The rain had not stopped, but it had gentled, shifting from the relentless drumming of morning to a softer, more contemplative patter that seemed almost like music. A new traveler arrived just as I was beginning to light the candles for the evening. The door opened with a gust of cold, wet air, and a man stumbled through, soaked to the bone, his clothes hanging heavy with water and his face drawn with exhaustion. I moved toward him immediately, but he waved me off. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice shook with cold. "Just wet, just tired, just a long way from anywhere I recognize." I brought him to the fire anyway, draping a blanket around his shoulders and pressing a mug of warm cider into his hands. He sat in the chair I had pulled close to the flames, shivering, his eyes fixed on the fire as though he could absorb its warmth through looking alone. "Where have you come from?" I asked, when his shaking had subsided enough that he could speak without his teeth chattering. "The wars," he said, and the word fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of silence spread outward from it, touching everyone present. The wars. We had heard of them, of course. Conflicts in the northern reaches, disputes over borders and resources, and the kinds of grievances that men have been fighting over since the first man picked up a weapon against his neighbor. But they had seemed far away, remote, part of another world, separate from the quiet peace of the crossroads. This man brought them back with him. They were written in the lines of his face, in the way his hands trembled even after the cider had warmed him, in the 1,000-yard stare that told of things seen that could never be unseen. "I am going home," he said after a long silence. "Or trying to. But the roads have changed. Villages I remember are gone. Landmarks I trusted are destroyed. I have been walking for weeks, and I do not know if I am getting closer or farther away." The mapmaker had been watching this exchange from his position at the large table. Now he rose slowly, carefully, leaning on his walking stick as he crossed to where the soldier sat. "Where is your home?" he asked. The soldier looked up, and for a moment his eyes focused on the mapmaker's face with something like hope. "A village called Thornwick," he said, "in the hills east of the border. It was small. Probably still is, if it still exists at all. No one important ever came from there. No one famous ever stopped there. But it was home." The mapmaker nodded slowly. "I know of Thornwick," he said. I passed through it once, many years ago. A village of farmers and shepherds, yes. There was a well in the center of town and an old church with a bell that had cracked and could no longer ring." The soldier's breath caught. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, that is Thornwick. You have been there. You know it." I know it," the mapmaker confirmed, "and I may be able to help you find your way back." He returned to his table and began searching through his papers, lifting map after map, setting each aside with increasing urgency. The soldier watched, his mug of cider forgotten in his hands, his entire being focused on the old man and his search. "Here," the mapmaker said finally, pulling a creased and faded map from near the bottom of the pile. "This is the region. I drew this 30 years ago, when the borders were different and the wars had not yet begun. The roads may have changed, but the land is not. The hills are the same. The rivers follow the same courses. If we compare what I recorded then with what you remember now, we may be able to chart a path that will bring you home." The soldier rose from his chair and crossed to the table, his blanket falling forgotten to the floor behind him. He leaned over the map, his eye moving across its surface with desperate intensity. "This road," he said, pointing, "this road is gone, destroyed in the first year of fighting. And this village here, it no longer exists. But this stream, I recognize this, and this hill. I camped in its shadow 3 weeks ago." "Good," the mapmaker said. "Good. Now we know where you were. Let us determine where you need to go." They worked together, the soldier and the mapmaker, for nearly an hour. The rest of us watched in silence or tried to help when we could. The tinker knew some of the northern roads. The courier had heard reports of which passages remained open. Slowly, piece by piece, a route took shape. Not the route the soldier had planned, not the route he would have taken before the wars, but a route that would bring him home. When they finished, the mapmaker did something I had not seen him do for any of the other maps. He picked up a fresh pen, dipped it in ink, and began to add to his atlas. "Thornwick," he said as he wrote, "should be in here. It should have been in here all along. Small villages are just as important as large cities, perhaps more so. They are where people come from. They are what people fight to return to." He drew the village on the map, a small cluster of buildings, the well, the cracked bell church, the hills rising behind it, the river flowing past. "There," he said, "now it will not be forgotten. Now, no matter what happens, Thornwick will exist in this atlas. Someone will look at it someday and know that there was a village there, that people lived and loved and raised their children, that a soldier fought his way home through war and ruin because he could not bear to live in a world where Thornwick did not exist." The soldier stared at the map with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for remembering." The white candle on the mantel flickered, and I could have sworn absolutely that its flame bent toward the map. Just for a moment, just long enough for me to notice. Then it straightened and burned steady once more. The process of creating a map, I learned that morning, is far more intimate than I had ever imagined. I had thought of map making as a technical skill, a matter of measurements and calculations, and the steady hand required to render complex information in ink. But watching the map maker work with the merchant woman, watching him coax details from her memory and translate them into marks on paper, I understood that it was something else entirely. It was listening made visible. The merchant woman described the lowland roads as she experienced them. The way the light fell differently on certain stretches, filtered through the low-growing vegetation that replaced the tall trees of the highland regions. The smell of peat and stagnant water that announced the approach of the marsh crossings. The particular sound of wheels on packed earth versus the squelch of wheels in mud that signaled you had strayed from the main path. And the Mapmaker captured all of it. Not in words, which would have been impossible, but in the quality of his lines. The roads through pleasant country were drawn with smooth, confident strokes. The roads through difficult terrain were rendered with a certain tension. The ink pressed harder into the paper as though to warn future travelers of what lay ahead. "How do you do that?" I asked, when the merchant woman paused to rest her voice. "How do you translate feelings into lines?" The Mapmaker looked up, surprised perhaps by the question, or perhaps by the fact that I had noticed what he was doing. "Everything we experience has a shape," he said. "Joy curves upward. Grief pulls downward. Fear creates jagged edges. Peace smooths them away. When someone describes a road to me, they are not just telling me where it goes. They are telling me how it felt to walk it. And I try to capture that feeling, that shape in the way I draw." He held up the map he had been working on, tilting it so I could see the detail. "Look here," he said, pointing to a section where the road wound through what the merchant woman had described as a particularly treacherous stretch of marshland. "See how the line wavers slightly? How there are small breaks and hesitations that you would not find on an official survey?" I looked, and I did see. The line was not straight and confident, like the roads in other parts of the map. It was uncertain, cautious, the visual equivalent of a traveler picking their way carefully across uncertain ground. "A surveyor would say this is poor craftsmanship," the Mapmaker continued. "They would say that roads should be rendered cleanly, without emotion, without interpretation. But I believe they are wrong. I believe that the emotion, the interpretation, the feeling of a place is part of its truth. Perhaps the most important part. And a map that captures only distances and directions, but not the human experience of traveling those distances and directions, is incomplete. It is a skeleton without flesh, a house without warmth." The merchant woman nodded vigorously. "I would not have thought to describe it that way," she said. "But yes, that is exactly how it feels to travel through the marsh crossings, uncertain, careful, as though the ground might shift beneath you at any moment. And now," the Mapmaker said, "anyone who looks at this map will know. They will feel it before they even begin the journey. They will be prepared not just practically, but emotionally. And perhaps that preparation will make the difference. Perhaps it will help them persevere when the going gets difficult, knowing that they are not alone in their struggle, knowing that others have felt the same way and made it through." I thought about that for a long time, about the maps we carry inside ourselves, the ones that record not just where we have been, but how it felt to be there, about the roads of my own life, the places I have traveled, the experiences that have shaped me into the person I am today. My father would have understood, I think. He built this inn to be more than just walls and a roof. He built it to be warm, welcoming, a place where weary travelers could find not just physical rest, but emotional restoration. He brought comfort into the very stones and timbers of this building, just as the mapmaker maps feeling into his lines and symbols. Perhaps that is what all makers do. Perhaps every act of creation is, at its heart, an act of mapping. We take the raw materials of the world and arrange them into patterns that express something true about our experience. We leave behind records of where we have been, how we have felt, what we have learned, and those records become guides for those who come after, showing them not just the way, but the meaning of the way. The morning continued, filled with conversation and creation. The other travelers contributed their knowledge, their memories, their roads. And with each contribution, the Mapmaker's collection grew richer, more complete, more alive, not more finished. Never that, but more alive. There was, for a moment, midway through the morning, when the rain stopped briefly and weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. The effect on the common room was striking. The maps on the table seemed to glow, their inks and papers catching the light in ways that made them appear almost three-dimensional. The rivers shimmered. The roads stretched toward distant horizons. The landmarks rose from the flat surface as though reaching for the sky. "Look at that," the older woman breathed, leaning closer to examine the nearest map. "It is as though they come alive." "They are alive," the mapmaker said quietly. Every map is. They are not just records of places. They are records of moments, of the sunlight that fell on a particular valley on a particular day when I happened to be passing through, of the fog that shrouded a coastal town when I first saw its harbor, of the storm that broke over a mountain pass just as I reached its summit. He touched one of the maps gently, reverently, as though greeting an old friend. "This one," he said, "I drew on the first day of spring many years ago. I remember the smell of new growth in the air, the sound of birdsong returning after winter silence, the feel of soft earth beneath my feet, no longer frozen but yielding into air. All of that is in here, captured in the lines, waiting to be released whenever someone looks at this map and truly sees it." "How do you remember all of them?" the older man asked. "You must have made thousands of maps over the years. How can you possibly recall the circumstances of each one?" The mapmaker smiled, and there was a hint of sadness in it. "I do not remember all of them," he admitted. "Many have faded, blurred together into a general impression of roads and places and experiences. But some, the special ones, remain as clear as the day I made them. The maps that marked turning points in my journey, the maps that captured moments of profound beauty or insight, the maps that I made for specific people to help them find specific destinations." He gestured toward the collection spread across the table. "These are the ones I could not bear to part with, the ones that carry too much of myself to be given away or sold. They're my autobiography, in a sense. The story of my life told not in words, but in roads, in the places I have been, in the way I saw those places and chose to render them on paper. The sunlight faded, swallowed by clouds that had been gathering on the horizon, but something of its warmth remained in the room, reflected in the faces of the travelers and the gentle glow of the maps on the table. You could write a book, the courier suggested, about the roads you have traveled, the things you have seen, the people you have met. The mapmaker shook his head. A book would be too fixed, he said, too complete. It would suggest an ending, a final word on the subject. But the roads do not end. The travels continue even when the traveler stops moving. The maps keep changing, keep growing, keep revealing new truths to those who studied them carefully. He paused, considering. Besides, he added, words are not my medium. I think in lines and spaces, in curves and angles, in the visual language of geography and cartography. If I tried to translate that into words, something essential would be lost. The feeling would drain away, leaving only the facts. And facts, useful though they are not the whole truth. They are not even the most important part of the truth. What is the most important part? The girl asked. She had been quiet for some time, listening, absorbing, her grandfather's compass clutched in her hand. The mapmaker turned to hers, his pale blue eyes soft with something like recognition. The space between the facts, he said. The room for interpretation. The invitation to experience the road for yourself. To find your own truth along its length. A good map does not tell you everything. It tells you enough to begin your journey, and then it trusts you to discover the rest. It leaves gaps. It poses questions. It makes you an active participant rather than a passive recipient. He smiled. The space between, young one, that is where the real meaning lives, in maps and in life and in everything we do, the space between. The girl looked down at her compass, watching the needle turn slowly, pointing toward something none of us could see. The space between, she repeated softly, like the roads that exist in the spaces between the ones that are charted. Exactly like that, the mapmaker agreed. You understand. Your grandfather understood too. It was one of the things I valued most about traveling with him all those years ago. He saw the spaces. He walked the roads that existed between, and now, perhaps, you will walk them too. The girl looked up, her eyes bright with possibility. Perhaps I will, she said. The evening deepened into night, but no one seemed inclined to seek their beds. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean and fresh, the air carrying that particular clarity that follows a long storm. Through the windows, I could see stars beginning to emerge, bright and sharp against the darkness. The common room had transformed over the course of the day. What had begun as a collection of strangers sheltering from the weather had become something else. A community, perhaps, or a congregation. We had gathered around the mapmaker's table as though around an altar, each of us offering what we carried, receiving in return something we had not known we needed. The maps now covered not just the table, but several chairs and a section of the floor, layer upon layer of roads and routes and destinations. The merchant woman's lowland paths, the tinker's network of forgotten villages, the couple's coastal memories, the courier's hidden mountain passages, the girl's dreamscape of impossible roads, the soldier's path home, and still the mapmaker drew. He worked by candlelight now, the fire having burned low to embers, his pen moving with a precision that seemed to defy his obvious exhaustion. Each new road was rendered with the same care as the first. Each landmark, each village, each crossroads treated with the reverence of something sacred. "I have a road to add," said a voice from the doorway. We all turned. A woman stood there, one I did not recognize. She had arrived sometime during the day, I realized, when the common room was full of voices and maps and a kind of focused energy that makes it easy to overlook quiet entrances. She was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back from a face that held both determination and uncertainty in equal measure. "Please, dear," the mapmaker said, gesturing toward an empty chair. "Sit, tell me." The woman approached slowly, her eyes moving across the scattered maps with the kind of hunger I had seen in the other travelers. She sat in the offered chair, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the table. "There is a road I have been looking for," she said. "A road I have never found. My mother told me about it before she died. She said there was a place where the living could visit the dead, not speak to them exactly, not bring them back, but visit. See them one more time, remember them as they truly were, not as grief makes them." The mapmaker's pen stilled. The room fell into a silence so complete that I could hear the embers settling in the fireplace, the soft breathing of the guests around the table, the distant call of an owl beyond the windows. "I have heard of such places," the mapmaker said quietly. "Thin places, where the boundaries between worlds grow soft. Crossroads that lead not just between different directions, but between different states of being. Have you ever found one?" the woman asked, and her voice was raw with hope. The mapmaker was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more personal. "Once," he said, "many years ago, I was young and I had lost someone dear to me, my wife. She died in childbirth, along with the child who would have been our daughter. I walked for months after that. I walked until my feet bled and my heart felt as empty as the roads I traveled. And one night at a crossroads very much like this one, I found what you were looking for." The room held its breath. "I saw her," the mapmaker continued, "not as a ghost, not as a spirit, as herself, as she had been in life. We did not speak exactly, words seemed unnecessary, but I sat with her there at the crossroads, and I remembered. I remembered everything we had shared, every moment, every laugh, every quiet evening by the fire, and when I rose to continue my journey, I carried those memories differently. They were no longer weights that dragged me down. They were treasures that I held close. The woman's eyes were bright with tears. "Where?" she whispered. "Where is this place?" "I cannot tell you," the mapmaker said, and before the woman's face could fall completely, he continued, "Because the road is different for everyone. The crossroads I found would not be the crossroads you need. Thin places are not fixed on the map. They move, they appear when they are needed, and they vanish when their purpose is served. The only way to find one is to walk, to keep walking, to believe that the road exists even when you cannot see it." He reached into his satchel and withdrew a blank sheet of paper. "But I can give you something that may help." He began to draw, his pen moving with a fluidity that seemed almost unconscious. Not a map exactly, more like a set of instructions, symbols and signs and markers that I did not recognize, but that seemed to pulse with meaning. "These are the signs to look for," he said as he worked. "The ways you can recognize a thin place when you approach one. The quality of light will change. The air will feel different against your skin. The sounds of the world will seem both closer and farther away at the same time. Your heart will know, even if your mind does not understand." He finished and handed the paper to the woman. She took it with trembling hands, holding it as though it were made of glass and starlight. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for believing me." "Grief is not madness," the mapmaker said gently. "The desire to see those we have lost one more time is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of love, and love, true love, can walk roads that reason cannot follow." The night grew late, and one by one, the travelers began to drift toward their beds. The merchant woman went first, pausing to squeeze the mapmaker's shoulder before climbing the stairs to her room. The tinker followed, having packed away his tools and carefully stacked the maps that pertained to the villages he knew. The older couple retired hand in hand, as they did everything. Their love for each other a quiet constant in a world full of change. The soldier lingered longer, studying the route home that he and the mapmaker had charted. "I will leave at first light," he said. "The weather should hold. If I walk quickly, I may reach Thornwick within a fortnight." "Take care," the mapmaker said. "The roads are long, and the world can be unkind, but you carry something with you now, a map, a direction, a reason to keep moving. These are not small things." The soldier nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I will make it," he said. "I have to. My family does not know if I am alive or dead. I have been gone for too long." "Then go to them," the mapmaker said. "Go home, and when you arrive, tell them what you found here. Tell them about the inn at the crossroads and the mapmaker who believes that every road matters no matter how small. Tell them that hope is its own kind of map." The soldier smiled, the first true smile I'd seen from him since his arrival. He climbed the stairs slowly, his footsteps heavy with exhaustion, but somehow lighter than they had been before. The mother and daughter were the last to go. The girl still clutched the map of impossible roads, her grandfather's compass hanging from a cord around her neck. The mother had her arm around her daughter's shoulders, protective and proud. "We will leave tomorrow as well," the mother said. "We have decided to follow the compass, as I said, to see where the roads between lead." "A fine choice," the mapmaker said. "Your father would be proud." The girl looked up at him with eyes that held worlds. "Will I find what I am looking for?" "That depends," the mapmaker said, "on what you are looking for. If you seek answers, you may find only more questions. If you seek endings, you may find only beginnings. But if you seek understanding of yourself, of the roads you walk, of the thin places where the world grows soft, then yes, you will find it. Perhaps not in the form you expect, but you will find it." The girl nodded slowly. She crossed to the mapmaker and, in a gesture that surprised us all, wrapped her arms around him in a fierce, brief embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Then she and her mother were gone, climbing the stairs together, leaving only the mapmaker and myself in the common room. I busied myself with small tasks, banking the fire, straightening chairs, wiping down the tables that were not covered with maps. But eventually there was nothing left to do, and I found myself sitting across from the mapmaker at his cluttered table, the white candle burning steady on the mantel behind us. "You have done something remarkable today," I said. He looked up from the map he had been studying, his pale blue eyes finding mine. "I have done what I always do," he said. "I have listened, I have drawn, I have tried to help travelers find their way." "It is more than that," I insisted. "You have given them something, each of them, something they did not know they needed." "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps I simply reminded them of what they already carried. The roads are inside us, you know. Every path we have ever walked, every crossroads we have ever faced, they live within us. They shape us. They become part of who we are. All I do is help people see them clearly." He looked down at the atlas spread before him, the great unfinished work of his life. "I came here seeking something," he admitted. "I heard about this inn many years ago, a place where the roads meet, a place where the boundaries grow thin. I thought perhaps I would find answers here. Perhaps I would finally understand what I have been doing all these years, why I cannot seem to stop, why I keep walking and drawing and recording, even though I know I will never finish." "Did you find your answers?" I asked. He smiled, and there was peace in it. "I've found something better," he said. "I've found that the answers do not matter. The walking matters, the drawing matters, the recording matters, the connections I make, the travelers I help, the roads I preserve in ink and paper, they matter. not because they lead to some final destination, but because they are their own kind of destination. The journey is the purpose. The map is the meaning. I thought about that for a long moment, about my father who had built this inn with his own hands, about the years I'd spent here welcoming travelers, listening to their stories, watching them rest, and then move on, about the white candle burning on the mantel given to me by an old woman who walked on top of the snow and told me to welcome them all. "I think I understand," I said. "I think you do," the mapmaker agreed. "This inn is its own kind of map. Each guest who passes through leaves a mark. Each story you hear, each meal you serve, each night of rest you provide, they all become part of the record. You're a mapmaker too, in your own way. You just use hospitality instead of ink." The 10th day of the month of falling leaves, the mapmaker left at dawn. I was awake to see him go, having risen early to prepare breakfast for the travelers who would be departing. The soldier had already eaten and set out, his step quick with purpose, the map to Thornwick tucked safely inside his coat. The mother and daughter were finishing their porridge, the compass pointing steadily toward the eastern road, toward destinations that existed in the spaces between. The mapmaker ate little, as had become his habit. A piece of bread, a few sips of tea. His satchel was packed and ready, lighter now than it had been when he arrived. He had given away several maps during his stay, and I suspected he would give away more before his journey ended, if it ever ended. If journeys like his could ever truly be called complete. "I have something for you," he said, as I helped him to his feet and handed him his walking stick. A token of gratitude for the hospitality, for the space to work, for the community that gathered here around these maps. He reached into his satchel and withdrew a single sheet of paper, carefully rolled and tied with a piece of string. I took it, feeling the weight of the paper in my hands, sensing somehow that what I held was more valuable than gold or jewels or anything the material world could offer. "What is it?" I asked. "Open it and see." I untied the string and unrolled the paper. The map that greeted me was small, but exquisitely detailed. It showed the crossroads, my crossroads, the inn, rendered in careful lines that captured not just its physical structure, but somehow its warmth, its welcome, its purpose. The ancient oak tree standing sentinel, its branches spreading wide over the intersection of the two ancient roads, the stable, the woodshed, the kitchen garden, dormant now in autumn, but waiting for spring. And there, on the inn's threshold, a figure, a man, standing at the door with arms open wide, as though welcoming all who approached. Me. He had drawn me. "This crossroads is special," the mapmaker said quietly. "I knew it the moment I arrived. The boundaries here are thin. The roads that meet here lead not just to different directions, but to different possibilities. This inn is not just a place to rest. It is a place of transformation. Travelers arrive here carrying one burden and leave carrying another. The weight does not change, but the quality of it does. Pain becomes wisdom. Grief becomes memory. Loneliness becomes solitude, which is a different thing entirely. He placed his hand over mine, over the map. Keep this. Hang it where the travelers can see it. Not to guide them here, for those who need to find this place will find it regardless. Hang it to remind them what they found when they arrived, the warmth, the welcome, the possibility of change. I could not speak. My throat was tight with emotion I did not fully understand. I managed a nod, which seemed to be enough. The mapmaker smiled, adjusted his satchel on his shoulder, and turned toward the door. The other travelers had finished their preparations and were waiting outside. The mother and daughter would head east. The woman, seeking the thin places, would go wherever her grief led her. The courier had departed even earlier, eager to deliver her messages and then return to chart that road that should exist. At the threshold, the mapmaker paused and looked back. "The atlas will never be finished," he said. "The roads will never all be mapped. But that is not a failure. That is an invitation to keep walking, to keep seeking, to keep recording the paths that others have found, so that those who come after might find them too." He stepped outside into the pale autumn sunlight, and I followed him to the door to watch him go. The ancient oak tree's ribbons fluttered in the morning breeze. The crossroads stretched in 4 directions, each one leading to a different future, a different possibility, a different set of roads waiting to be discovered. The mapmaker walked slowly but steadily toward the southern road. His walking stick tapped its familiar rhythm on the hard-packed earth. His satchel, lighter now, but still full of purpose, swayed gently with each step. I watched until he reached the crest of the first hill, where the road dipped down and out of sight. At the top, he paused and turned. Even at that distance, I could see him raise one hand in farewell. I raised mine in return. Then he was gone, over the hill and into whatever journeys awaited him. I have spent this evening in my small room beneath the sloped ceiling at the desk my father built when I was a child. The white candle burnt on the mantel downstairs, as it has burned since the old woman gave it to me, steady and unwavering. Through my small window, I can see the stars emerging, bright and countless, each one a destination that will never be reached, but that lights the way nonetheless. The mapmaker's gift hangs on the wall of the common room now, where travelers can see it as they enter. Several have already stopped to study it, tracing the roads with their fingers, finding themselves in the careful lines of the crossroads and the inn, and the welcoming figure at the door. I find myself thinking about unfinished things. The atlas that will never be complete. The roads that exist only in the spaces between. The journeys that have no destination, only direction. The maps we carry inside us, recording every path we have ever walked, every crossroads we have ever faced. My father built this inn with his own hands. He felled the trees, he carried the stones, he raised the walls and laid the shingles and crafted the desk where I now write, but he did not finish it. He could not, because an inn is never finished. It grows, it changes, it becomes something new with each traveler who passes through its doors, each story that is told within its walls, each meal shared beside its fire. The Mapmaker understood this. The journey is the purpose. The map is the meaning, not because they lead to some final destination, but because they are their own kind of destination. I am a map maker too, he said. I use hospitality instead of ink. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps this diary is my atlas. Each entry a road recorded, each traveler a landmark marked. Each night of welcoming, each morning of farewell, each small kindness exchanged between strangers who become something more before they part. The atlas will never be complete. The roads will never all be mapped. But that is not a failure. That is an invitation. The candle burns, the fire settles, the inn waits, patient and warm, for whoever the road brings next. And I will be here, as I always am, ready to welcome them, ready to listen, ready to add their stories to the record. Because this is what I do. This is what I have always done. I keep the crossroads. I guard the between time. I map the roads of the heart. With every meal served and every bed made and every weary traveler who finds their way to my door. The mapmaker's final words echo in my mind as I set down my pen. An invitation to keep walking, to keep seeking, to keep recording the paths that others have found, so that those who come after might find them too. Good night, dear journal. Good night, old friend. The stars are bright over the crossroads tonight, and somewhere out there, an old man with a satchel full of unfinished maps is walking toward his next discovery. May his road be gentle. May his journey be long. And may everyone who seeks find what they are looking for, even if it is not what they expected.
And so ends tonight's entry from the Crossroads Inn. The Mapmaker has continued on his endless journey, leaving behind roads both finished and unfinished, stories both told and waiting to be discovered. If you found comfort in these words, we hope you will return, when next the candle burns and the innkeeper opens his journal. Until then, rest well. Let the roads of your dreams lead you to gentle places. And remember that every journey, no matter how long or how uncertain, is its own kind of destination. Good night, dear traveler. Safe journeys. And until we meet again at the crossroads, may you always find your way home.